The OWCS Finals at Dreamhack Dallas this past weekend showed everyone just how many different heroes were viable at the highest level of play. There was a surprising amount of Venture, MAUGA, ROADHOG, and to the surprise of many, PHARAH. So this is going to be an end of season hero tier list to help you finish your season strong. This video was sponsored by Star Wars Hunters. This is a free-to-play 4v4 third-person PvP arena combat game where you can play as your favorite hunter. Love Wookiees? Play Graz. Siths? Play Reeve. There's a plethora of new characters between nefarious bounty hunters, heroes of the rebellion, imperial stormtroopers, and everything in between. There's plenty of unique cosmetics like costumes, animations, and weapon appearances. You have your daily quests and of course, high-intensity PvP combat like Squad Brawl. By the way, does this area look familiar? We're in an arena inspired by Tatooine. This game has plenty of battlefields that evoke iconic Star Wars locales. Your journey to fame starts here. Battle in the Star Wars arena now using my link in the description or scan the QR code on the bottom left of your screen, available on Nintendo Switch, iOS, and Android. D.Va is acceptable and still good for most players, but honestly the mid-season patch knocked her down a bit from the high tier and she probably rests comfortably in like the A tier. Still pretty good, right? Her damage is abysmal against the armor changes, especially when you compound it with the headshot damage reduction for tanks. So like the previous D.Va versus Winston matchup, honestly not even that favorable for D.Va anymore. Another example, maybe Hog as well, D.Va versus Hog. I mean, Hog never had armor before, but now he just flat out reduces all of 25% of the damage to the head, and the majority of D.Va's bullets are aimed at the chest to head high, right? So D.Va is stuck playing more of an opportunist role, not really farming the tanks, not that she really did, but it was always like a nice additional option for her, but now it's not really viable, so you're stuck either peeling, diving vulnerable squishies, and those two are still fine in dandy playstyles, especially in ranked, so I'll leave her in the good tier, a little bit above average, but she's no longer like the S tier or top tier pick anymore. DOOMFIST is probably a tier below D.Va, down in the B, in the fine tier. Acceptable if you're great with Doom mechanics, and definitely a bit more durable thanks to the headshot damage reduction once again. However, since Cassidy is just super meta right now, the Hinder Nade plus the rise of all the Roadhogs running around makes it really hard to lock in Doom every game and expect to pop off. Like, there's a bunch of his counters running around, and if there's more than 2 of them in each lobby, you're just not gonna have a good time. JUNKRAT is probably still fine for most players, but is a bit rough against Cass and Hog as well, similar to DOOMFIST. The armor changes didn't help Queen as well, since her scattergun is all pellet damage, and that is low enough where it's going to be reduced by 50% against armor targets, so it makes it really tough to chew through. Obviously, if you're going for squishies, it's fine, but in the neutral, you sit there shooting the closest target, waiting for an opportunity, and oftentimes that person in your vicinity is probably an armored tank, so it all will like indirectly start tying into the lower rampage uptime. Then you compound all the Kirikos running around. That doesn't help. You have to make sure Suzu's baited as well before you can ult. So JUNKRAT's ult hard to play against, you know, Roadhog hook, Cassidy, Hinder, Suzu. There's too many things that make it hard to like super pop off with Queen, but these are very specific scenarios where all those meta picks are in the lobby. If they aren't, she's probably fine on average, so I'm gonna leave her in B tier. MAUGA is just straight up great right now in the A+ tier. I know he was nerfed like a season ago, but this recent mid-season change kind of indirectly propelled him back up, because of a new strategy with new theory crafting and new metas, plus the armor changes. So we want to unpack it first. Let's talk about the strategies, right? So teams, high-level teams, especially we saw at the Dreamhack Dallas OWCS Finals this past weekend, that using Cardiac Overdrive, the button, you know what I mean? That gives you, what, 30% damage reduction and like 60 or 70% lifesteal for that period of time. So that's an all or nothing ability, but all your teammates can get it as well. So then people theorize that MAUGA plus Venture is a really strong all-in brawl idea, because instead of Venture kind of like doing their thing and then burrowing out, playing like an old Reaper where you like you pew pew pew, wraith out to get out, you just burrow in and go all in with the MAUGA, so you get that, you know, 60% lifesteal plus all the damage reduction, and these kind of stats always multiply or are like Very strong when you compound it with other abilities like Venture. Synergizes because Venture gets 40 shield health every time they use an ability, so lots of health keeps coming in, or HP keeps coming in when Venture starts popping all the abilities, and they all have 30% damage reduction on top of that thanks to MAUGA's haha, which means Venture is durable enough to do an entire cooldown rotation and probably stay alive long enough, confirm some kills, and then burrow out afterwards. So Venture can burrow in without too much worry. Now, another thing is, again, that whole mid-season, armor changes to small pellets. Yes, MAUGA has machine gun pellets, but forced criticals from MAUGA, which is basically, when you light someone up and you burn them and you shoot them with both and it makes that ding, 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 ding sound, those are crits. Those don't count as headshots. So MAUGA can bypass that 25% headshot damage reduction, puts him back into A+ tier. ORISA got gutted in the early Season 10 hotfix patch with way slower cooldown rotations between Fortify and Javelin Spin. So I'm going to put her in the tough tier right off the bat. Then we had that mid-season patch with the armor and the headshot damage reduction changes, which again also actually nerf ORISA pretty hard, because ORISA's entire shtick is you poke, 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 poke nonstop with your weapon, and then you all in, if you land a spear and you spin in. But like that cooldown rotation to stay invincible isn't very good anymore because you can't cycle them as well. So you're stuck there poking, but the poking is way worse when you do the math. Turns out this is a 12% nerf to the majority of her damage against all armored targets and a 20% nerf to her DPS against tanks, specifically when headshotting them. So the previous favorable matchup against ROADHOG, for example, isn't even that favorable for ORISA anymore, since you previously just farm head from ROADHOG. But yeah, I think ORISA is just kind of tough to play right now. All the things that made her good, like the invincible rotations and high damage, are all nerfed over the past month. I'd stay away from her. RAMATTRA is honestly a pretty good tank all around. Solid brawl option. I'm going to put him in A tier. While his Omnic form poke did get worse against armored targets, the pummel punches got better. Not much has actually changed with him. He's still a staple in like super high elo play and coordinated pro play, and if you can master him, he's definitely versatile enough to win you many games. REINHARDT is a big discussion where there's plenty of players on the fence with him on both sides, right? You have the high elo Rein players who will always think he's bad, and that, echoes and kind of resonates with their audience, especially if they're streamers and content creators. And there's the reality of REINHARDT for the majority of players, where he's an absolute demon in the metal ranks because 3 or 4-way counterpicking isn't really a thing. Yes, he's not fun to play in high elo if the enemy goes like Mei, Bastion, RAMATTRA, Zen, whatever. But in your average lobby, there's always going to be that MOIRA or that Mercy one trick or that Soldier one trick. They don't really do anything to REINHARDT, and then Rein is allowed to stand there menacingly with no pressure to his shield. Rein also benefited a lot from the mid-season patch quite a bit because A, he doesn't deal headshots at all, so that damage reduction thingy that happened has no effect on him, and the armor changes nerfed small pellets in instances of damage, but big bursts like his Fire Strike or his Hammer Swings come out on top as a net buff. So I think if we average it out, he's actually pretty good. I actually think he's an A tier hero. Okay, ROADHOG was so damn strong after the mid-season patch, they had to hotfix him and nerf him like 10 days later on like May 24th. So even so, he's still a ranked demon. He doesn't need teammates, he doesn't need voice chat, he can do his own thing, he can secure picks, and he can heal himself. He's the reason why they call it solo queue. ROADHOG never had armor, so the whole 25% damage reduction to the head was just a straight up giga buff to ROADHOG, right? A lot of heroes end up trying to headshot him to farm him, but like that all gets reduced. And you compound that with his giant HP pool, the damage reduction on Take a Breather, the healing on Take a Breather, and you just have an unkillable machine. Although his shotgun pellets are nerfed against armored targets, the majority of his value came from hooking squishies specifically and then pelting them down. And then most non-tanks don't have armor besides Torb and Brig anyway, so Hog, arguably meta, probably down a tier to A tier, still great thanks to that, but like definitely maybe not at the top since that minor hotfix nerf a week ago, but yeah, still great. Okay, not everyone will agree with me, but I actually think Sigma is the best tank on the patch right now, and it's probably meta, actually is meta in my opinion. Hear me out. He's decent against MAUGA, and all the Roadhogs, and his offensive output, like Sigma's offensive output, got better against armored targets because it's big bursts. He never headshot anyways with his orb, so you can ignore that part. And then on the defensive side, he's got his shield, he's got the suck to give him a lot of green overhealth, and then that headshot damage reduction from enemies makes him unbelievably durable. And I think he's an insta-pick on most of the Overwatch maps as a flexible fallback. Winston was another hero that benefited from the mid-season patch for many reasons. Number one, the Tesla cannon ignores armor and it never headshots tanks anyway. And number two, the Primal Rage melee smacks do better on armor now. And number three, Ana is actually much better against armor targets this patch. The previous 70 damage shot that she used to do offensively used to get reduced to 49 damage on armor because of that 30% reduction. But now that damage over time, or that dot from Ana, completely ignores armor and it deals that full 70 damage. And that makes it really nice. And then you couple that with Tracer being worse against armor, and Tracer used to be like Ana's nightmare, and then guess who's the backline buddy with Ana? It's Brig, and then, you know, that all synergizes very well, and it helps enable Winston, and it probably pushes him back up to the A+ in the great tier. We saw plenty of it, because Korea loves Winston, we saw it at the OWCS, good stuff. Wrecking Ball's probably a sleeper pick, dark horse, arguably great in the hands of a great ball player, but most players probably still pretty good though. You know, he received buff after buff. You know, he had that grapple retraction at first, which opened up way more fireball movement techs, and enough time has passed now where some players have figured it out. You have that option to give adaptive shield now to teammates. At first, when the buff came in, a lot of ball players said it's useless because they never do it, but like, it's still a net buff because it's just a choice. You didn't have to, but it's another option to save someone if needed, if you happen to roll past them. So I watched Junbin from Crazy Raccoon, who literally won the OWCS at Dreamhack Dallas this past weekend, and he showcased it. He actually rolled back and frequently tossed that overhealth to his teammates. I think these players have min-maxed and optimized the hero very well. And then you compound that with Ball receiving 4 buffs in the mid-season patch, like 2 weeks ago. So I really think he's a very stacked ability kit now. He's arguably great. I'm going to actually bring him up to great right now. Zarya is fine, but not very popular right now due to the rise of Winston, which is a very tough matchup. And there's also the fall of D.Va, the Orisas, and the JUNKRAT, who are Zarya's strong matchups. Zarya can still pop off and be annoying against maybe like ROADHOG, for example, by saving anybody who gets hooked. But all in all, definitely nothing too spectacular on the bottom half of this tier list, I would say, but still fine. Okay, Ashe, pretty good in the A tier. Dynamite got a major buff against armor. Now the initial explosion is only nerfed by 5 flat damage, but the total damage over time now remains untouched. In short, Dynamite used to deal 115 total damage because armor would reduce it by 30%, and now it's only that initial pop for 5, but the damage over time is full. So it used to be 115 total, now it's 145, and this compounds when you take into account multiple targets with your Dynamite. So if we take a look at this spreadsheet made by Cactus Puppy, everything pretty much went up in damage against armor besides Coach Gun, but like who cares, that's a movement ability. So if you have a MAUGA, you can also burn people for him with your Dynamite because that synergizes and counts as a burning effect, so MAUGA can start critting immediately, so that's a cool synergy. Bastion has been niche, and I think he stays niche this patch, although he's actually a pretty solid counter pick if you're running into problems against Winton. Bastion requires a healthy amount of resources to be enabled, and if you don't have the right comp built around him, he may suffer, as I have. He does have some armor, but with the armor changes, big bursts do more damage against him, like Sojourn's Rail, or like the example before, Ashe chucking a Dynamite at you, that deals full damage to you, minus the Ironclad passive. So I think Bastion stays in C tier, at least for me. Cassidy, still a staple pick in the meta. Definitely an S tier ever since the Season 9 patch like 4 months ago now, where Overwatch had the entire, you know, like bigger projectile size, HP pool increase across the board. Cass was one of the heroes that suffered the least on that patch because back-to-back headshots still killed, like the TTK or the time to kill, and a lot of his matchups weren't affected on that patch, which kind of propelled him to the top after being mediocre for quite some time. Hindernade is just such a strong deterrent and keeps certain heroes at bay, and it's sort of a necessary evil to keep DOOMFIST, Tracer, Ball, Sombra on lock, and ensures those heroes don't completely dominate the lobby. Echo is always going to be a great A+ pick in my opinion, if you can master her. She's not too reliant on Mercy, the burst damage is fantastic, and Duplicate's still one of the best ultimates in the game. She's just unfortunately not too popular with the majority of players due to her incredibly high skill ceiling and mechanical requirements, but to me still a great A+ pick. Genji's a funny hero, where Genji mains always ask for more buffs, or rather, they make it a meme with the better nerf Genji when things have nothing to do with them. I've always considered him quite good in the A tier, especially after the Season 9 changes, because the projectile size made it very, very hard to miss those close range shurikens up close, and the extra 50 HP on him made him durable enough to survive with deflect and dash out and escape if need be. Yes, his blade is only 110 damage a slash. It's a bit papery, but I think the attack speed went up, or the recovery rate. The time between went down, which is a buff to the attack speed. But good Genjis always know how to use it to clean up rather than feel like they have to like engage by themselves and eat all the cooldowns. It's always just been a skill issue with Genjis. When a Genji main complains about not being able to kill 5 players by themselves like they used to, Proper from Team Falcon showed everyone this past weekend at OWCS Dreamhack how to blade correctly. I think he literally had 4 separate instances of a 4 or 5k team wipe against the best players, like defensively on the other team as well. Like the enemy players know how to manage their cooldowns and move a lot better, but Proper still shows how good Genji can be. HANZO, honestly, I think he's B tier. I actually think he's fine after this midseason patch. He was arguably, you know, C tier previously, but the armor changes indirectly buffed him a lot in those matchups, especially as a tank buster where he unloads everything into the front line now. Yes, he can't one-shot a 250 HP hero at full charge against a squishy in the back line, so his playstyle has slightly changed. He has to take strong angles, and honestly, he can still shoot the backline when possible, but at least unloading into the enemy tank and burning them down first is now a better and viable option in a lot of cases. JUNKRAT has also been bumped up to B tier, the fine tier in my eyes. Like the armor changes again helps burst heroes like Junkrat for spam pressure, and he sorta has a 2-shot back. I say that very lightly. He recently had his primary fire buffed from 120 to 125, so back-to-back 125 shots, now deals 250 and can confirm a kill on their own. Mei is in the middle of the pack in B tier. She's fine as a brawl option and can be very cheesy with the wall on specific maps. Her icicles are better on this patch actually. You can set up some plays with your team with the walls and then trap some of the immobile tanks like MAUGA and ROADHOG running around. Okay, PHARAH. PHARAH was the biggest surprise this patch. Honestly, I'm going to jump her up to great in the A+. The OWCS this weekend showed us how many teams and players actually preferred playing her over some other staples, even like Echo. And I think it's for a few reasons. Number one, the initial rework back in Season 9 at first was so fresh and new, there was this learning curve. And I said it in my tier list a few months back in the Season 9 one, that I actually thought she was a dark horse. She had the potential to be very good from the small flashes I saw, but it was still too early to tell at that time. And now that enough time has passed and players got used to the new fuel, the new playstyle, and that playstyle is honestly just chill and spam rockets, it's great. You no longer just fly into open airspace with Mercy. You have to kind of like finesse around corner and hover around tight walls, and that ends up being like the optimal playstyle, as you can see. Now, I think another reason why she's good is the armor changes this past week. That helped burst damage heroes like HANZO, like JUNKRAT, and of course like PHARAH. And the third reason is probably that she's really good with MAUGA. Remember, it was one of those theory-crafted comps I mentioned earlier with MAUGA and Venture, and you can slot in PHARAH, and some of the top teams realize that with MAUGA going in and popping the ha-ha, and then it gives PHARAH full lifesteal during Barrage. Like, that's crazy. And that damage reduction, like kind of like a pseudo nano boost. Or even some teams practice the LIFEWEAVER Life Grip combo to ensure that you as a PHARAH can pull off a safe ultimate. It's actually very good when played in the right conditions. Reaper is just a worse version of Venture or Mei as the Brawl DPS hero. The armor changes made him awful at tank busting since he's all pellet damage, so his shtick is to assassinate backlines. But how can you do that with backlines being like Ana Brig right now, or Bat Brig, who are just so sturdy, or Lucio KIRIKO, who are just too slippery? It also doesn't help that if he does go on the flank, he announces his TP every time, like, repositioning, I'm on the flank. You know, they need to buff Reaper by making him shut his mouth, and add some more depth to a hero who has quite frankly fallen behind in the past 8 years. He's tough to play. He's another D tier hero for me. SOJOURN's still a staple pick in S tier. Don't know what to say. Rail damage is fantastic, strong movement ability, and slide to get away from nasty stuff. Nothing to say here that hasn't been said before. Soldier, I'd say he's pretty good. He's pretty good. Not as great as some of the other DPS choices now, but still solid, especially in ranked play. He's a simple hero. Remember, with Soldier right now, you want to open up your engagement against armor targets with Helix Rocket before pelting them down with your primary fire, because Helix is better now against armor because it's big burst, but nothing else has changed besides being a bit weaker against armor targets with your primary fire weapon against tanks when at mid to long ranges with that damage fall off, but he plays the same for the most part. Sombra is another hero that actually has sort of taken a step back. Probably still fine in the B tier, but like the virus damage was nerfed from 100 to 90 at the beginning of season 10, and the other heroes and options in DPS have just simply been better. Tracer does her role, like flanker, assassinator, but is just a safer choice, and she's more efficient. So I call Sombra just like a Walmart Tracer. If you can play Sombra, or if you can play Tracer over Sombra, you should just play Tracer. SYMMETRA still niche in C tier, and she's going to stay niche. The devs are looking at doing something with her, if I recall, in a recent dev AMA a few weeks ago. I think Sim is just in this awkward spot where she does like 4 separate things, and none of them are spectacular enough to warrant her to be played outside of like maybe a few control maps and some very niche matchups. She's either all in with her beam, but the beam is hard to build up, and if she does stay in the front line with the beam, she may die because she's putting herself in a vulnerable spot. If you play the turret style, the turrets are just weaker ever since season 9 because everyone has more HP, so you can't cheese people and kill them with that much. Similarly with the secondary fire, the big orbs you charge up, they can't two-shot people anymore because of that extra HP. And the fourth and the best place to offer Sim is probably the TP strategy play, but that's like reserved for all 5 team members to be in, you know, in voice chat or in comms, which can be pretty cool and awesome when it works out, but your average ranked game won't be seeing this very often. You're lucky if you even have like 2 people who are in voice chat, so you can forget about that strat in ranked play. But in scrims and in pro play, you might see a couple of Sims being pulled out, but by definition, that kind of makes her niche, right? Torb, honestly good. I like him. I think Torb's good. His primary fire poke got better against armor, and the turret, not too bad of a change. Slight nerf against armor. Overall, he's an even better anti-Tracer now because he has his own base armor, which means Tracer has to deal with the turret, and you're more durable with your armor. Pretty good if you'd have no movement mechanics on Tracer and you just want to play an anti-Tracer hero. Tracer, I'm gonna knock her down from server admin meta to just A tier. Still great though, right? Still great. I think the meta and armor changes have bumped her down just a bit, where it's probably safer to just pick Cass or Sojourn unless you're like a strict Tracer man and you already have mastered her mechanics. That being said, like 8+ tiers, she's still great. She can still do her role despite those armor changes because backlines normally don't even have armor. Venture was played a ton this past weekend, and thanks to the synergy with the MAUGA comps coming through. I explained it before in the MAUGA section, but I'll explain it again. If you skipped here and you didn't hear it, timing your engagements with Cardiac Overdrive gives you so much compounded value and makes it safer to engage makes it safe to engage with Burrow rather than using it just to disengage. But I'm only gonna put them in B tier. Fine, they're fine on average, but with MAUGA specifically, that comp bumped to A or an A+ tier. But again, if you're locking in Venture in an average ranked lobby on every map, not always a MAUGA, it's not gonna work every time. They're a brawl hero, and if the map is way too like long-sighted, you have that very limited range, right? And you don't have the right heroes around you, you're gonna end up with some pretty miserable stat lines, because like Cassidy, as soon as you unburrow, is just gonna hinder you, and you're pretty much dead on every engage, like you're cooked. Every Venture I played with over this past week just so happened to not have a MAUGA. We didn't have a MAUGA comp built around them, and they had terrible stat lines. I did not have a single Venture that had a great stat line. They were like 17 elims, 15 or 16 deaths, 9k damage, while the other DPS like the ASHE had like 18k damage. It was not a good time. I'm still not impressed with a lot of the Ventures in ranked. So OWCS showed us flashes of what they can do with the right comp, but on average, fine. Can be very cheesy and burst people, especially in metal ranks where they don't expect the burst damage, but just like right in the middle of the pack. WIDOWMAKER, probably gonna leave her in B tier as well, in the fine tier. Like, if you pop off, you can dominate, sure. But otherwise, you can get marked pretty easily by a Tracer, Winston, Ball, DOOMFIST. And like, these are all popular tanks again, and it'll be tough to force Widow on every map on every point. She's kind of map and hero dependent. And by map, even like specific map points. Like, second point, Dorado, great. But third point, like, why? Ana has been indirectly buffed this patch with the armor changes. Her 70 damage over time actually deals 70 damage now instead of 49, where previously that 30% armor reduction would kick in. And now it's completely ignored, which allows you to poke tanks and the occasional Bastions, Torbs, and Brigs. With Winston becoming more popular as well, it makes him a nice nano target, so comp synergy wise, she's back. And I'd say she's pretty good. I'll put her in A tier. Baptiste is a great pick. He kind of does it all. right? He synergizes quite well with some of the top meta tanks, as he's great with literally any standing ground based tank like Sigma, Roadhog, MAUGA, Ram, Rein, etc. And since this tier list is kind of accounting for average ranked play, he also has the option to completely DPS and melt enemies down by himself. The only thing that's tough now is with the slow rise of Winston and Ball, BAP actually has a bit of trouble staying alive against them, and without any help, you may run into some problems, but that's why some teams run BAP Brig specifically. But for now, I'll keep him in A+ tier. I think he's a great hero. Brig has seen a lot more playtime, and I'm going to say she's actually good in the A tier, especially when paired with Ana or even BAP. You definitely see BAP Brig running around, like I just said, and it's something I've even scrimmed with my team myself, except Custa hates playing Brig, so we kind of stopped doing it. The armor changes helped against Tracer, who was probably the biggest problem for backlines for a while, and she's a great pick when paired correctly. She does fall a bit behind when the enemy team runs a comp where Brig feels almost useless as there's no flankers to peel off, but when I watch average Brig play in the metal ranks, she generates enough baseline value by just simply existing with the Inspire aura and packs, the heal packs, and that's more than acceptable and good for most players. ILLARI is also, I'd say, pretty good and ranked. I'm gonna put her in A tier. One thing that people need to know is that 25% headshot damage reduction for tanks doesn't apply to ILLARI, since she's only ever had a 1.5x headshot multiplier since release, and then further reducing that would kind of suck. So for now, it does the full normal damage against tanks, and it also doesn't really get affected by armor, right? The armor changes means it's a net -5 flat instead of -30%, which means indirectly 2 indirect buffs for ILLARI in those matchups. We actually saw a bit of ILLARI also played in the OWCS as well, paired with LIFEWEAVER. One support does all the damage, ILLARI, and the other one does all the healing. More on Weaver in a moment. But we got to go in alphabetical order first and cover KIRIKO. Still meta, still S tier. At least in my opinion, not much to say here. She's safe, she's reliable, the angles she holds are uncontestable since she can just TP out. Suzu is great, damage is great, Kitsune Rush is great. What can't she do? Unless you suck at hitting kunais, she's going to be a top pick with a high skill ceiling for the foreseeable future. Okay, now on to LIFEWEAVER. I actually think he's B tier. I think he's fine. He's still a little awkward between the rotation between damage and with the thorns and the heals, but if we really lean into his strengths, and what he does, which is the raw healing. Some pro teams have experimented with LIFEWEAVER doing all the healing, while the ILLARI support pair deals the off-angle damage. And then you pair it up with like maybe PHARAH, who has now risen up in popularity and runs some set life grip plays to ensure some safe barrages. It's actually been very refreshing to see some playtime for him at a pro level. In your average ranked game, I've always thought he was fine in B tier for metal ranks because he's a baseline reliable heal that can't miss, and will always outvalue a high skill ceiling hero at low ranks like KIRIKO, like Ana, like BAP, because they have not 100% accuracy, right? But the higher ranks you go with LIFEWEAVER, the lower his reliability, and he kind of like falls down to C tier as a niche pick. Because again, LIFEWEAVER's specific playtime in OWCS was a set design play around him and ILLARI, and if you don't have a strong support pair, like if you lock in LIFEWEAVER and you have a Mercy one trick on your team, good luck. He's just a heal bot, and that may not be enough to win games. Okay, Lucio stays meta, S tier. Despite some of the small nerfs a few months ago, nothing has really changed because Lucio is still the only support that can reliably engage, disengage, take duels, pair up with another DPS flanker, and control certain angles in space. He has a surprisingly versatile playstyle. You can go like all aggro, red at Lucio, assassinate people, or play with your team, speed them, AoE heal them, get some fast Lucio beats, and I think he's just a necessary piece in so many comps that he has to be S tier for now. Mercy, it's maybe a bit of a hot take. A lot of people rate Mercy as like one of the worst supports, but I actually think Mercy is B tier, and she's actually fine in this specific patch because there's so much Sojourn and Cass being played, and with the rise of PHARAH as well, you can play Mercy with them and damage boost, right? It definitely won't be like it used to with PHARAH where you fly into open space, but it's still a fine pairing. Mercy just usually falls down in tier lists in the meta depending on the season and depending when it's like a pure tracer and divey meta with no good pairings. But with the current meta like DPS heroes, Mercy is actually fine for the most part. MOIRA, a bit niche, but also fine, I would say, on average for most players as a Baptiste or KIRIKO substitute if you absolutely do not have the mechanical aim skill. She was nerfed a bit at the beginning of Season 10 with the Biotic Grasp damage going down by 5, but other than that, I think she generates enough value by existing and is perfectly acceptable for most players. Now, finally, ZENYATTA. Now, this is going to be weird. I mean, I play a lot of Zen, but I actually think, relatively speaking, he's the worst support when compared to all the other supports right now. Like, even LIFEWEAVER and Mercy have more niches they can fill than Zen on this patch, and that's why I put them at B tier, but Zen stays in C tier for now, because I find less and less reason to play him when there's like 4 better options. Like, for example, in traditional BAP Zen Sigma comps, you can actually replace the Zen with like KIRIKO or like LUCIO or ILLARI or even Brig. Just play, yeah, BAP Kiri, BAP LUCIO, BAP ILLARI, BAP Brig. And tanks on the enemy teams have also learned how to like play around that new Discord where they kind of like wait it out and then they wait for it to break, and they're good for 7 seconds without having the constant Discord orb, and they can actually walk up and play around that, and they have that 25% damage headshot reduction, right? That definitely doesn't favor Zen, since him and ILLARI are like the high DPS flex supports, but at least ILLARI ignores headshot reduction and Zen doesn't. So like, literally, I think ILLARI's like a bit better solo queue option. But anyways, I digress. Just my opinion. At the end of the day, play what you want in ranked. Don't let this tier list make the choice for you. Make your own choice. Just my opinion. Let me know what you guys think. Peace. Thank you again to Star Wars Hunter for sponsoring today's video. Click the link in the description or scan the QR code on the bottom left.